The age of many walls and many kings was drawing to a close. For centuries, the 7 major states had bled each other, their endless wars carving up the land and sowing it with the bones of their soldiers. But from this crucible of conflict, one state emerged, stronger, more ruthless, and more organized than all the rest. The state of Qin, once considered a semi-barbarian kingdom on the western fringe, Qin had been forged into a terrifyingly efficient war machine. Its rulers, guided by a harsh philosophy known as legalism, had centralized power, reformed the administration, and organized its entire population for 2 purposes: farming and fighting. In the year 2021 BCE, the final rival state fell, and the king of Qin, a man named Ying Zheng, achieved what no one before him ever had. He had conquered all under heaven. He was the master of China. But Ying Zheng was not content to be a mere king. He invented a new title, one that would echo through millennia. He called himself Qin Shi Huang, the first August emperor. And with this new title came a new staggering vision. He would not simply rule the collection of states he had conquered. He would meld them into a single unified empire, an empire that would last for 10,000 generations. To do this, he understood that he had to erase the past. He had to break the old loyalties and destroy the old divisions, and his gaze fell upon the walls, the very walls that had defined the warring states period, the ramparts that the kingdoms of Wei and Zhao and Han had built to protect themselves, were now a threat. They were physical reminders of a fractured world, obstacles that threatened the unity of his new empire. So the first emperor issued a revolutionary decree. All the fortifications that stood between the former states, the walls that separated his people from one another, were to be torn down. It was a radical act of political engineering, a command to physically erase the borders of the past. But as he tore down the internal walls, he envisioned a new one, a single great wall, on the empire's northern frontier. This would not be a defense against a rival Chinese state. This would be a barrier between civilization and the wilderness, a line drawn upon the earth to separate the ordered world of his empire from the chaotic world of the northern nomads, the Xiongnu. In 2115 BCE, just a few years after unification, the emperor dispatched his most trusted general, Ming Tian, to the northern frontier. With him, Ming Tian led a colossal army, some sources say as many as 300,000 soldiers. Their purpose twofold. First, they were to launch a preemptive campaign to drive the nomadic Xiongnu tribes from the strategic Ordos region, a fertile loop of land inside the Great Bend of the Yellow River. This was not a response to an immediate threat, but a calculated move to annex territory and to clearly, unambiguously define the northern border of the new Qin Empire. Once the Xiongnu were chased away, the second phase of the mission would begin. Ming Tian was to connect and extend the existing northern walls of the old Qin Zhao and Yan states, linking them together into a single, unbroken system. This was the birth of the Dabao, Wanli Chang Chang, the 10,000 li long wall. A li is an ancient Chinese measure, about a third of a mile, and while the name was symbolic, the ambition was very real. The project was one of the most audacious construction efforts ever undertaken by any civilization. The new wall was to stretch from the coast of the Bohai Sea over 3,000 miles westward into the deserts of Gansu province, a dragon of earth and stone that would guard the entire northern frontier. The sheer scale of this undertaking is difficult to fathom. The wall traversed vast mountain ranges and barren semi-deserts, regions with frigid winters and sparse populations. The logistical challenges were immense. While much of the building material, The earth itself could be found on site. Transporting everything else, food, water, tools, and additional supplies, was a nightmare. The sinologist Dirk Baudet once observed that for every single man Ming Tian could put to work on the actual construction, dozens more must have been needed simply to build the roads to get there and to haul the supplies that kept them alive. This was only possible because of the new centralized power of the Qin state. The legalist reforms that had turned Qin into a military powerhouse now allowed the emperor to command a labor force on a scale the feudal kingdoms could never have dreamed of. The massive professional army, with no more internal enemies to fight, was repurposed for this colossal public work. The Great Wall of Qin Shi Huang, therefore, was more than just a wall. It was a statement, a declaration. By tearing down the old walls, the emperor declared that the past was dead. By building one great new wall, he declared the birth of a new world, a world with a single, unified China at its center. It was an act of creation and of destruction, a project that would define his reign and leave a legacy of both awe and terror. Close your eyes and listen. Listen to the sounds of the past, of the building of the first emperor's great wall. There is no clang of modern machinery, no roar of engines. There is only the sound of human effort, multiplied by hundreds of thousands. It is a soundscape of rhythmic thuds, the heavy, dull impact of wood on earth, over and over and over again. It is the sound of shuffling feet, of shouted commands, of the creak of wooden handcarts, and perhaps the murmur of work songs, chants passed from man to man to keep the rhythm, to endure the toil. This was the world of Hang Tu. Hang Tu, the ancient Chinese technique of rammed earth construction, the method by which the first Great Wall was raised. It was a technique as old as Chinese civilization itself, with roots reaching back into the Neolithic age, thousands of years before the first emperor was born. The builders were not masons laying bricks, they were sculptors of the very land they stood upon. The process was one of brutal, relentless simplicity. First, workers would erect a frame, two parallel wooden planks, held fast with ropes or braces, creating a mold for a section of the wall. Into this frame, they would pour a damp mixture of the local soil, whatever the earth provided, sand, gravel, silt, and clay. They poured it in a shallow layer, perhaps only 15 or 20 centimeters deep, and then the tamping would begin. Lines of men, armed with heavy wooden pounders or rollers, would begin to compact the soil, their movements synchronized. A human machine, they would pound and press the earth until that shallow layer was compressed to half its original volume, becoming dense and hard as stone. Then, another layer of earth would be poured, and the process would repeat, layer upon layer. The wall would rise, a geological formation, accelerated by human will. When the frame was full, it would be removed and repositioned further down the line, leaving behind a freestanding section of wall, a solid earthen rampart. These walls were incredibly thick, often several meters wide at the base. This immense thickness made them extraordinarily resilient. They were not brittle like a thin stone wall. They could absorb the impact of siege weapons, the battering rams and catapults of the age, swallowing the force without shattering. This method, using the local earth, was born of necessity. It was the only practical way to build on such a vast scale across the arid plains and lowest plateaus of northern China, where stone was scarce and timber precious. The wall that resulted was not an alien structure imposed upon the landscape. It was the landscape itself, reformed, repurposed, the earth rising up to become its own defense. But who were the hands that held the tampers? Who were the backs that bore the weight of this monumental task? The labor force was a vast cross-section of Qin society, a testament to the state's total control over its people. At the top of this hierarchy were the soldiers, General Meng Tian's army of 300,000, who, in times of peace, were tasked with construction as part of their military duty. They were the primary builders and the guards overseeing the project. Then came the common people, the peasants. Millions of them were conscripted under the corvée system, a form of unpaid labor tax. They were required to leave their farms, often during the agricultural off-season, and work on the emperor's projects for a specified period. It was a heavy burden, one that tore families apart and left fields untended. And finally, at the bottom, were the criminals, the convicts, and the prisoners of war. For many crimes under the harsh laws of Qin, the punishment was servitude on the wall. Their hair would be shaved, their faces perhaps tattooed, and iron rings clamped around their necks or legs, a mark of their status. They were a supplementary workforce, driven by punishment, toiling in the harshest conditions. This stratified army of builders, soldiers, peasants, and prisoners represented the full might of the Qin state, its ability to mobilize every part of its society toward a single imperial goal. The rhythmic pounding of the earth, the sweat of the peasant, the despair of the convict, all were ingredients in the mortar of the empire. All were compressed into the layers of that long earthen dragon, snaking its way across the northern frontier. The reign of the first emperor was as brilliant and as brief as a flash of lightning. After his death, the Qin dynasty he believed would last for 10,000 generations crumbled and fell. In the chaos that followed, much of his great wall, that earthen dragon on the northern frontier, was neglected. It began to erode, to slump back into the landscape from which it had been so violently razed. But the idea of the wall, the need for a great border, did not die. A new dynasty rose to power, the Han, who would rule China for over 400 years, and they would take the concept of the Great Wall and push it further than ever before. The Han emperors faced the same northern threat as the Qin, the formidable Xiongnu confederation of nomadic tribes. So they began the painstaking work of repairing, rebuilding, and massively expanding the fortifications. But the Han had a new ambition, one that would change the purpose and the very geography of the wall. Their gaze was fixed not just on the northern steppes, but far to the west, towards distant lands, and the promise of trade. This was the dawn of the Silk Road, that legendary network of routes that would one day connect China to the Mediterranean. The Han emperors understood that for this trade to flourish, the route had to be safe. Caravans laden with precious silk, spices, and other goods were vulnerable targets for raiding tribes as they traversed the dangerous lands to the west. And so, the Great Wall began a new phase of its life. It started to march west under the powerful Emperor Wudi, who reigned from 1401 to 87 BCE. The wall was extended on an unprecedented scale. It pushed deep into the arid lands of modern-day Gansu province, following a narrow string of oases known as the Hexi Corridor, a vital artery for trade, squeezed between the Gobi Desert to the north and the high Tibetan Plateau to the south. This Han extension stretched for hundreds of miles, reaching its final outposts at two legendary gates, Yumenguan, the Jade Gate, and Yangguan, the Sun Gate. These passes, southwest of the oasis city of Dunhuang, became the formal western boundary of the Chinese Empire, the final checkpoint before the vast uncharted territories of the western regions. The wall was no longer just a static shield. It had become a fortified corridor, a great channel designed to protect and control the flow of commerce. It was an instrument of economic policy, a tool for projecting power and securing the wealth that flowed along the Silk Road. Building in this new environment, the harsh Gobi Desert demanded new techniques. Here there were no vast Loess plains for rammed earth, no mountains to quarry for stone. The Han builders, like their predecessors, adapted using the materials the desert offered. They laid down foundations of sand and crushed gravel, and on top of these they placed layers of reeds and woven tamarisk twigs, a tough, shrubby plant that grew in the arid soil. These layers of vegetation were then covered with more sand and gravel and compacted, creating a surprisingly durable wall that could withstand the desert winds. The remnants of these Han walls, and even later walls built in the same tradition, like the Gobi Wall of the Shisha dynasty, still stand today, testament to the ingenuity of desert construction. Recent studies of these later desert walls reveal that their purpose was complex. They were not just for defense against armies, but also for managing the movement of people, regulating trade, and asserting imperial control over a challenging environment. This was the new identity of the Han Wall. It was a fundamental shift in purpose, from a purely defensive barrier to a dynamic economic and political tool. It was the empire's lifeline, a long, fortified artery pumping goods, ideas, and influence across the vastness of Asia. The wall was no longer just about keeping people out. It was about ensuring that the right people and the right goods could safely travel through under the watchful eye of the Han Empire. The Great Wall of the Han Dynasty, stretching for thousands of miles across desolate landscapes, was a marvel of engineering. But a wall, no matter how long or how tall, is a passive thing. It is a silent, static line. An enemy can choose where to attack and when, to transform this silent line into a responsive living defense. The Han perfected a technology even older than the wall itself. The beacon tower system, this network of towers, was the nervous system of the frontier, an ancient, incredibly effective telegram service that could flash a message across hundreds of miles faster than the swiftest horse. Imagine a soldier, a lone sentry, standing watch on a high tower somewhere in the vast emptiness of the Gobi Desert. His eyes scan the horizon. Suddenly, he sees it, a dust cloud in the distance, the telltale sign of approaching horsemen. He does not need to ride for help. He simply turns to the materials prepared and waiting on the platform of his tower. If it is daytime, he lights a fire of dried grasses, branches, and most famously, wolf dung. The dung, plentiful on the steppes, produced a thick, dark, oily smoke that rose straight and high into the clear desert air, a signal that could be seen for miles. This is why the smoke signals were often called lang yang, literally wolf smoke. If it was night, he would light a great fire, a blazing torch against the immense darkness of the frontier. The soldier in the next tower, perhaps 5 or 10 li away, sees the signal. He does not need to know the cause. His duty is simple and immediate. He lights his own beacon, and so it went, a chain reaction of fire and smoke, leaping from tower to tower, a message of alarm traveling along the wall's spine, alerting garrisons, forts, and command posts, and ultimately the capital itself. But this was no simple alarm. The Han had developed a sophisticated code, a language of light and smoke. The number of fires lit or the number of smoke columns raised conveyed specific information. Historical records from the Han Dynasty detail the system. One fire might signal an approaching force of fewer than 1,000 enemies. 2 fires warned of a larger force, over 1,000 strong. 3 fires meant that the enemy was not just approaching, but was actively attacking the fortifications at that very moment. This was crucial intelligence. It allowed commanders to gauge the severity of the threat and to dispatch an appropriate response, not just sending soldiers blindly into the unknown. They could supplement these signals with other methods, waving flags in particular patterns, or beating drums and clappers to alert the immediate vicinity. The towers themselves were marvels of defensive architecture. They were often built on the highest ground available, on mountain peaks or hilltops, to maximize their range of sight. Most were square, built of the same local materials as the wall, rammed earth in the plains, or stone in the mountains. They were not just signal platforms, they were self-contained fortresses. The Han-era towers often had 2 or 3 floors. The top floor was the open platform for observation and signaling. The lower floors contained Spartan living quarters for the soldiers stationed there, a place to rest and seek shelter from the brutal weather. They also served as storehouses for weapons, food, and most importantly, the fuel for the signals, the wood piles, and the animal dung. This ingenious system transformed the Great Wall from a mere physical obstacle into an intelligent, sentient defensive network. It gave the long, static line of the wall eyes and a voice. It was a tripwire, a vast communication web that bound the frontier together, ensuring that no part of it was truly isolated. A single plume of wolf smoke rising in the west could set in motion the entire military apparatus of the Han Empire, a testament to the organizational genius that underwrote the power of the wall. The grand histories tell us of emperors and generals and the sweeping strategies of empires. But what of the men who lived on that line? The soldiers whose daily lives were the reality of the Great Wall? For them, the wall was not a symbol of glory or a marvel of engineering. It was home, a workplace, and a prison, all rolled into one. Thanks to a remarkable archaeological discovery, we can hear their voices, faint whispers from 2,000 years ago. In the arid sands near the western reaches of the Han Wall, at places like Dunhuang and Joyang, archaeologists have found hundreds of small slips of wood and bamboo, the letters and administrative records of the soldiers who served there. These are not official histories. They are personal, raw, and unfiltered, the mundane, and often heartbreaking chronicles of life on the frontier. Imagine a young man, perhaps 23 years old, from a farm in central China. Under the Han military system, he, like all healthy men of his age, was conscripted for 2 years of service. After his initial training, he was sent here to the edge of the world, to a garrison on the Great Wall. His life became a cycle of grueling routine. His duties were endless and varied. He would spend long hours standing guard atop a watchtower, staring into the vast, shimmering emptiness of the desert, watching for the faintest puff of dust on the horizon. He would join patrols that marched for miles along the wall, checking for damage and for any signs of intruders. He was also a farmer. Part of the Han strategy was to make the frontier garrisons self-sufficient. So soldiers were put to work on military-run farms, called Tuntian, tilling the harsh soil to grow the grain that would feed them, and he was a construction worker, constantly repairing the earthen ramparts, which were forever being eroded by the fierce desert winds. The conditions were brutal. The climate was one of extremes, scorching heat in the summer that baked the land, and sub-zero cold in the winter when icy winds howled down from the Siberian steppes. His rations were meager and monotonous. The bamboo slips record the official allowances, mostly grain, millet, wheat, or barley, and a small amount of salt, but the letters reveal a constant anxiety about food. One soldier writes to an officer, "What concerns me most is that after receiving the grains you sent to us 3 days ago, the food is going to be inadequate again. But more than the physical hardship, It was the profound loneliness, the soul-crushing homesickness that dominated their lives. These men were thousands of miles from their families, in a strange and hostile land. Their letters are filled with longing. One soldier writes a letter to his parents, found in a Dunhuang beacon tower. His words are simple and universal. The weather is severely cold, and I hope you take care. He expresses his deep regret that he cannot be home to fulfill his filial duties, thanking his brother and sister-in-law for looking after their parents in his absence. Another soldier, writing to a friend, reveals the desperation of their situation. He speaks of being from a poor family, of having lived outside the wall for a long time, and of waiting, endlessly waiting, for the new Garrison troops who are scheduled to replace them. When the replacement arrives, he writes, we will be able to go back home. They wrote to each other, these comrades in isolation, offering what little comfort they could. The spring has been upsetting. One writes to his friend Zai Yu, I hope you dress warmly and eat well. I look forward to receiving your letters. These small human details, preserved by the dry desert air, paint a picture far removed from the grand narrative of empire. They remind us that the Great Wall was not just built of earth and stone. It was built of the lives of ordinary men, men who felt the cold, who worried about their next meal, and who dreamt, more than anything, of simply going home. Their voices, carried across 2 millennia on fragile slips of wood, are the true human legacy of the wall. History is not a straight line, and the story of the Great Wall is one of ebbs and flows. For centuries, it was the central pillar of Chinese defensive strategy, a project of immense cost and effort. But there came a time, a long and glorious era, when the wall was allowed to sleep, when the empire looked upon it not as a vital shield, but as a relic of a bygone age. This was the Tang Dynasty, which reigned from 618 to 907. The Tang is often remembered as a golden age of Chinese civilization, a time of incredible cultural flourishing, economic prosperity, and crucially, military might. The Tang emperors did not huddle behind fortifications. They pursued an aggressive, expansionist foreign policy. They did not wait for enemies to come to them. They rode out to meet them and to conquer them. They shattered the power of the northern Turkic tribes, the successors to the Xiongnu, and expanded the borders of their empire far to the north and west. Their territory stretched deep into the Mongolian plateau, far beyond the traditional lines of the Great Wall. For a dynasty whose domain extended so vast, a wall built to defend a much smaller heartland was simply obsolete. It was a line on a map that had been redrawn, and so the Tang did not build walls on any large scale. They also had a powerful lesson from recent history. They had risen to power after the collapse of the short-lived Sui dynasty, a dynasty that had exhausted its resources and its people on massive construction projects, including 7 major repairs and extensions of the Great Wall. The Tang rulers understood that the true strength of an empire was not in its walls of earth, but in the support of its people. They believed, as one emperor put it, that winning hearts and minds was far more important than building fortifications. And so, for nearly 300 years, the Great Wall slumbered, battered by wind and rain, slowly returning to the earth. But this age of confidence would not last. After the fall of the Tang, China once again fragmented, and the dynasty that eventually reunited it, the Song, found itself in a much more precarious position. The Song dynasty, which ruled from 960 to 1279, was a period of incredible artistic and technological innovation, but it was militarily weak, especially compared to the powerful nomadic empires that rose on its borders. Crucially, the Song lost control of a vital strip of land in the north, a territory known as the 16 Prefectures, which included the mountainous regions where the heart of the Great Wall stood. The Khitan people of the Liao Dynasty, and later the Jurchens of the Jin Dynasty, now held the keys to the northern passes. The Great Wall, for the Song, was in enemy hands, unable to rely on the stone and earth ramparts of their ancestors. The Song had to innovate on the flat, vulnerable North China Plain, where there were no mountains to form natural barriers. They devised a brilliant and unconventional new form of defense, a living wall. The Song government ordered the planting of vast defensive forests, great belts of elm and willow trees, planted so densely that they formed a green Great Wall. These palisades of trees were designed to thwart the primary nomadic advantage, the speed and shock of their cavalry charges. Alongside these forests, they created extensive networks of man-made lakes, ponds, and deep moats, linking them together to form water barriers that would mire and slow an invading army. The contrast between the Tang and the Song could not be more stark. The Tang, strong and confident, looked beyond the wall and saw it as irrelevant. The Song, weaker and on the defensive, looked back at the wall with longing and were forced to recreate it in the form of trees and water. A dynasty's relationship with the Great Wall, it seems, was a direct reflection of its power and its place in the world. It was a barometer of imperial health, its importance rising and falling with the fortunes of the empire it was meant to protect. For more than 1,000 years, the purpose of the Great Wall, in all its various forms, had been clear. It was a line, a barrier, a shield, built by the settled agricultural civilization of China to defend against the nomadic horsemen of the northern steppes. It was a physical manifestation of the divide between two ways of life, the farmer and the herder. But in the 13th century, the unthinkable happened. The line was not just breached, it was erased. The northern horsemen, under the banner of the Mongol Empire, did not just raid China, they conquered it. In 1271, Kublai Khan, the grandson of the great Genghis Khan, formally established the Yuan dynasty, and by 1279, all of China was under Mongol rule. For the first time in history, the entire country, from the southern coasts to the vast Mongolian steppes, was controlled by a non-Han people, the very people the wall had been built to keep out. In this new reality, the Great Wall, as a military fortification, became instantly and utterly obsolete. There was no longer a northern frontier to defend. China and Mongolia were now one, a single vast empire. And so, for the duration of the Yuan dynasty, the great construction projects that had defined so many previous eras came to a complete halt. The Yuan emperors did not build the Great Wall. They had no need to, yet the wall did not disappear. It was not torn down. Instead, it was repurposed, its function transformed to suit the needs of its new masters. The Mongols, pragmatic rulers of a vast multi-ethnic empire, saw the wall not as a shield, but as a tool of administration. While the wall was of little significance to them as a military defense, they recognized its value for control. They continued to garrison some of the key forts and passes, but their purpose was no longer to stop invading armies. It was to police the arteries of their empire. The wall became a corridor for controlling commerce, especially along the lucrative Silk Road, which flourished under the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. The gates of the Great Wall, once slammed shut in the face of northern traders, now served as customs checkpoints, where duties could be levied on goods and travel could be regulated. It also became an instrument of internal security. The Mongols were a minority ruling over a vast population of conquered Chinese, and the threat of rebellion was ever present. The wall, with its forts and garrisons, served as a useful network for monitoring the populace and limiting the movement of potential dissidents. This administrative use of walls was not without precedent among nomadic-rooted empires. Recent archaeological studies of a section of wall in the Gobi Desert, known as the Mongolian Arc, reveal a fascinating parallel. This wall, built not by the Han Chinese, but by the earlier nomadic-founded Khitan Liao dynasty, was also not primarily a military barrier. Its structure, with numerous gaps and enclosures, suggests it was designed to channel and control the movement of people and their herds, perhaps for taxation or to manage grazing lands. The Mongols of the Yuan dynasty, it seems, viewed the Great Wall through a similar lens. It was an existing piece of infrastructure, a tool of statecraft that could be adapted to their own needs. This period reveals the ultimate nature of the Great Wall. It is not an inherently ideological structure. Its purpose is flexible, molded by the priorities of whoever holds power. For the Han dynasties, that power was directed outward, a defense against the other. For the Mongol Yuan dynasty, that same power was directed inward, a means to administer their vast new territory and control their subjects. The wall, it turned out, could serve the conqueror just as effectively as it had served the conquered. It was, and always had been, an instrument of imperial control. The Mongol rule over China, the Yuan dynasty, lasted less than a century. By 1368, a rebellion led by a former peasant named Zhu Yuanzhang had driven the Mongols from their capital and established a new native Han Chinese dynasty, the Ming. The Mongols fled back to the northern steppes, but they did not vanish. They remained a potent threat, a lingering shadow on the northern frontier, a constant reminder of the humiliation of foreign rule. For the new Ming emperors, the Mongol problem was an obsession, one that would shape their foreign policy and their architectural ambitions for the next 300 years. In the early years of the dynasty, the Ming favored an offensive strategy, launching campaigns into the steppe to crush the Mongol forces. But a catastrophic event in the year 1449 changed everything. At a place called Tumu, a massive Ming army was ambushed and annihilated by the Oirat Mongols, and worse, the Ming emperor himself, Zheng Tong, was captured and taken prisoner. This, the Tumu crisis, was a national trauma. It shattered the military confidence of the Ming dynasty and forced a profound shift in their national psychology. From that moment on, the Ming turned inward. Their grand strategy shifted from offense to defense. They would no longer seek to conquer the steppe. They would seek to wall it out permanently. And so began the greatest, most extensive, and most ambitious phase of wall building in human history. Starting around the year 1474, the Ming emperors began a colossal project to construct a new Great Wall, one that would be stronger, more sophisticated, and more enduring than any that had come before. This is the Great Wall that captivates the world today, the iconic image of a stone dragon snaking over mountain peaks, the magnificent structure that tourists flock to see at places like Battling and Mutianyu. The vast majority of the wall that remains, the best preserved and most recognizable sections, are the product of the Ming dynasty. This was a technological leap forward. The Ming builders largely abandoned the ancient technique of rammed earth, especially in the critical sections protecting the capital, Beijing. Instead, they quarried massive blocks of stone from the mountains, and they fired countless millions of gray bricks in nearby kilns. These new materials had enormous advantages. Bricks were uniform in size, making them easier to transport and faster to lay. Stone provided a foundation of immense strength and durability. A wall of brick and stone could be built taller, steeper, and could better withstand both cannon fire and the relentless erosion of time. The project was centrally organized with ruthless efficiency. The entire northern frontier was divided into 9, and later 11, military districts or garrisons. Known as Zen, each garrison was responsible for the construction and defense of its section of the wall, creating a more manageable and responsive system of command. The labor force, as in centuries past, was a vast assembly of human effort. The main force was the army, the soldiers guarding the frontier, who were tasked with construction as a primary duty. They were supplemented by conscripted peasants and banished criminals, forced into labor. The logistics were staggering. A single stone block could weigh a ton, a single brick more than 15 kilograms. Transporting these heavy materials to the high remote mountain ridges was a back-breaking task. Men formed long human chains, passing bricks and baskets of mortar from hand to hand up the steep slopes. They used simple machines, wheelbarrows, winches, and rolling logs. Legend even tells of herds of goats being used, with bricks tied to their horns, to help carry materials to the mountaintops. The Ming Great Wall was more than a construction project. It was a national obsession, born from the trauma of defeat. It was a turn inward, a monumental effort to create an impenetrable barrier, a physical manifestation of a new defensive national identity. It was a declaration, written in stone and brick across thousands of miles, that China would never again suffer the humiliation of being overrun from the north. It was a fortress, built by a dynasty that lived in the shadow of fear. The Great Wall of the Ming Dynasty was not merely a wall, it was a complete, integrated military defense system. The culmination of nearly 2,000 years of strategic thinking and architectural evolution. Every element, from the height of the ramparts to the placement of a single loophole, was designed with a specific purpose: to create a layered, mutually supporting fortress, capable of repelling the most determined of attacks. Let us take a slow architectural tour of this marvel of pre-modern warfare. The heart of the system, of course, was the wall body itself. In the most critical sections, especially those guarding the approaches to the capital, Beijing, the wall was a formidable structure. It rose to an average height of 7 or 8 meters and was 6 to 7 meters wide at the base, tapering to about 5 meters at the top. This was wide enough for 5 horsemen to ride abreast, or for 10 soldiers to march shoulder to shoulder, transforming the top of the wall into a military highway, allowing troops and supplies to be rushed to any point of attack. The outer face, facing the enemy, was topped with high crenellated battlements, called duoco. These were about 2 meters tall, with large openings for observation and for archers to fire upon attackers, and smaller loopholes near the bottom for shooting at closer range. The inner side had a lower meter-high parapet wall to prevent soldiers and horses from accidentally falling off. But the true genius of the Ming system lay in its towers. An estimated 25,000 watchtowers were built along the wall, with a forest of stone sentinels. These were not placed randomly. They were positioned at regular intervals, typically every 200 or 300 meters, close enough for archers to provide overlapping fields of fire. Crucially, the towers protruded from the main wall. This was a key defensive innovation. It allowed the defenders inside the tower to fire along the face of the wall, creating a deadly crossfire that could rake the flanks of any enemy attempting to scale the ramparts with ladders, eliminating any blind spots. The most significant Ming innovation, however, was the development of the hollow watchtower. Earlier towers had been solid platforms with perhaps a small hut on top for shelter. The Ming towers, under the direction of brilliant generals like Qi Jiguang, who oversaw the construction of 1,200 advanced towers, near Beijing, were multi-story fortresses in their own right. The interior of a typical tower had 2 or 3 levels. The lower floors provided secure, sheltered living quarters for a garrison of more than 10 soldiers, along with storerooms for weapons, ammunition, grain, and water, and even stables. This meant that the soldiers did not just patrol the wall, they lived inside it. Each tower was a self-sufficient defensible outpost, a strong point that could hold out, even if the wall between the towers was breached. This transformed the Great Wall from a simple line into a chain of interconnected micro-fortresses, where the wall crossed key strategic routes, such as mountain passes or trade roads. It was anchored by massive forts or passes. These were the command centers of the defensive system, places like the famous Juyong Pass, northwest of Beijing, or Jeyuguan, the first and greatest pass under heaven, at the wall's far western end. These passes were defensive strongholds of immense complexity, with high, thick ramparts, multiple gates, and often a semicircular or polygonal outer wall, called a wencheng, built to shield the main gate from direct assault. Every detail, from the drainage ditches that protected the foundations from rainwater to the beast-shaped ornaments on the roofs of the gate towers, was part of a system that was both brutally functional and deeply symbolic. The imposing height of the towers, the sheer scale of the ramparts, the way the wall snaked over the highest, most treacherous mountain ridges. This was all designed not just to defend, but to awe, to project an image of unshakable imperial power, and to serve as a psychological deterrent, a warning written in stone that the lands beyond belonged to the Ming and would be defended to the last. For over 2 centuries, the mighty Ming Great Wall stood as a symbol of the dynasty's defensive resolve. It was the most formidable military barrier on Earth, a testament in brick and stone to the Ming's determination to secure their realm. Yet, in the end, the wall that could stop a Mongol army could not save the dynasty from itself. Its failure was not one of architecture, but of politics. It was not breached by cannon, but opened by a key, turned by a man facing an impossible choice. The year is 1644. The Ming dynasty is rotting from within. Decades of corruption, famine, and rebellion have brought the empire to its knees. A charismatic rebel leader, a former postal worker named Li Zicheng, has amassed a vast peasant army and has done the unthinkable. He has marched on the capital, Beijing, the Chongzhen emperor, the last of the Ming rulers, seeing his palace surrounded and his dynasty in ruins, walks to a hill in the imperial garden and takes his own life. The news spreads like wildfire. The Ming dynasty has fallen, but 2 other great powers remain on the chessboard. To the north, beyond the Great Wall, the Manchu people, a formidable force from Manchuria, have been growing in strength for decades. They are led by the shrewd and ambitious Prince Regent Dorgan, and they are poised on the frontier, watching and waiting for their moment to strike. And between these 2 forces stands one man and one fortress, General Wu Sangui, commander of the Ming's most elite, battle-hardened army, garrisoned at the most strategic point on the entire Great Wall, Shanghai Pass, the first pass under heaven, where the wall meets the sea. Wu Sangui is now caught in a terrible bind. The rebel leader, Li Zicheng, now occupying Beijing, demands his surrender. To ensure his compliance, Li has taken Wu's entire family hostage, including his father, Wu Shang, and according to legend, his beloved concubine, Chen Yuan. Wu, a loyal Ming general, is torn. He is unwilling to serve a peasant rebel who has overthrown his emperor. He is enraged that his family has been captured and humiliated, but he also knows that his army though powerful, is likely no match for Li Zicheng's massive force. And all the while, Dorgan and the Manchu army wait just outside the pass, his lifelong enemies. He is surrounded, his dynasty is dead, and he must make a choice that will alter the course of Chinese history. In his desperation, Wu Songui makes a fateful decision. He sends a letter to the Manchu regent, Dorgan. He will surrender to the Manchus, his sworn enemies, and he will open the gates of the Great Wall. If Dorgan will join him in an alliance to crush the rebel army of Li Zicheng. Dorgan, seeing his opportunity, agrees. On May 27, 1644, the armies meet at the foot of Shanhai Pass, Li Zicheng's massive rebel force against the smaller but more disciplined army of Wu Songui. The battle rages all day. Wu's troops fight fiercely, but they are outnumbered and begin to falter. By late afternoon, they are on the verge of defeat. Then, as a violent sandstorm descends upon the battlefield, shrouding the world in dust and chaos, Dorgan makes his move. The Manchu cavalry, their foreheads shaved in their distinctive style, charge out of the storm, a terrifying, unstoppable force. They slam into the flank of Li Zicheng's army, the rebels exhausted from their fight with Wu, and stunned by the sudden appearance of these fearsome warriors. Panic, their lines break, and the retreat becomes a bloody, chaotic rout. The battle is over. Li Zicheng's army is shattered. Wu Songui, true to his word, opens the gates. The Manchu army, the northern horsemen, the wall was built to repel. March unopposed through the first pass under heaven. They march on to Beijing, and they do not leave. They establish a new dynasty, the Qing, which would rule China until 1912. The Great Wall, the Ming's ultimate defense, had not failed. It had been betrayed. Its stones were strong enough to stop an army, but they were powerless against the internal collapse of the state and the desperate choices of a single conflicted man. In its final, most crucial test, the Great Wall was rendered irrelevant, a silent stone witness to the death of a dynasty. With the Manchu conquest and the establishment of the Qing dynasty, the Great Wall entered its final long twilight as a military structure. The new emperors, like the Mongols before them, ruled a vast territory that encompassed both China proper and the lands to the north. Once again, the wall was no longer a frontier, but an internal feature of a massive empire. Its strategic purpose, so vital to the Ming, evaporated. The Qing had little interest in maintaining it, and for the next 250 years, the great fortification was largely abandoned, left to the mercy of the wind, the rain, and the encroaching sands. Sections crumbled, towers decayed, and local farmers, seeing no use for it, pilfered its bricks and stones to build their houses and pigstays. The dragon of stone was slowly, quietly going to sleep. But as its physical form decayed, a new, and perhaps more powerful, identity began to emerge. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as Western travelers, merchants, and missionaries began to arrive in China in greater numbers, they were awestruck by the sheer scale of the decaying ramparts. For them, the Great Wall became the ultimate symbol of China itself. It was an emblem of the nation's immense age, its mysterious power, and its perceived isolation. It was both a physical manifestation of Chinese strength and a psychological metaphor for the barrier the Qing state maintained, repelling foreign influences and controlling its people. This Western fascination helped to plant the seeds of the wall's modern identity. In the early 20th century, as the Qing dynasty collapsed and China entered a new turbulent era, Chinese thinkers and leaders began to look for symbols to forge a new national identity. Sun Yat-sen, the father of modern China, was among the first to proclaim the Great Wall as a source of national pride, a symbol of the Chinese race's endurance against foreign invasion. This idea gained immense power during the brutal years of the Sino-Japanese War in the 1930s and 40s. The wall, a physical barrier against invaders from the north, became a potent symbol of heroic resistance against the Japanese. After the Communist Revolution, the wall's symbolism continued to evolve. Sometimes it was used in propaganda art to contrast the old feudal China with the new industrial China of Mao Zedong. Then, in the 1980s, under the reforms of Deng Xiaoping, the wall was reborn once again. Deng launched a campaign with the slogan, "Love our country and restore our Great Wall." This had a dual purpose, to physically restore sections of the decaying Ming Wall for a burgeoning tourism industry, and to reaffirm the wall as a powerful symbol of national unity and pride. It was during this period that the phrase, "He who has not reached the Great Wall is not a true man," originally from a poem by Mao Zedong, became a national rallying cry, a secular pilgrimage for every Chinese citizen. In 1987, this transformation from military barrier to cultural icon was given global recognition. The Great Wall was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The official inscription celebrated it as an absolute masterpiece, a unique example of military architecture that served a single strategic purpose for 2 millennia, and a monument of incomparable symbolic significance in the history of China. The modern era has also been a time for demystification. The most famous myth, that the Great Wall is the only man-made structure visible from the moon, has been thoroughly debunked. Astronauts have confirmed it is not visible from the moon and is only sometimes barely visible from low Earth orbit, and only under perfect conditions. The wall's journey through time has been remarkable, from a series of disparate earthen mounds born of internal fear, to a unified imperial border, to a neglected ruin, and finally to a global symbol of resilience and heritage. Its meaning is not fixed in its stones. It has been built and rebuilt by every generation that has looked upon it, a mirror reflecting the changing face of China and the world. And so, our story comes to an end, but the wall itself endures. It is no longer a place of battle or of bitter toil. The cries of soldiers and the laments of laborers have faded into the wind, leaving behind a profound and peaceful silence. The Great Wall has completed its final transformation from a barrier of conflict into a place of natural beauty and quiet contemplation. Let us take one last slow journey along its sleeping spine and feel the passage of time and the changing of the seasons. Imagine it is winter from December to February. A hush has fallen over the mountains of northern China. A thick blanket of snow, pure and white, covers the landscape and dusts the ancient stones of the wall. The air is cold, crisp, and clear. The usual crowds of summer are gone, and a deep tranquility settles over the scene. To walk the wall in winter is to experience its solitude, to feel its immense age. The only sounds are the crunch of your boots in the snow and the whisper of the wind as it whips around a lonely ice-rimmed watchtower. The world is a stark, beautiful canvas of white snow, gray stone, and the deep blue of the winter sky. Then, slowly, the world begins to thaw. Spring arrives from March to May, and with it, a sense of renewal. The harsh winds soften into gentle breezes. The frozen earth awakens, and the mountainsides erupt in a riot of life. The trees that cling to the steep slopes bud and then burst forth in 1,000 shades of vibrant green. Wild flowers, pinks and yellows and purples, bloom in the crevices between the ancient stones. The wall winds its way through this lush, rejuvenated landscape, no longer a grim fortress, but but a garden path, a place of pleasant, mild weather, perfect for a long, slow walk, a meditation in motion. This endless wall crosses not one landscape, but many. In the east, it climbs the rugged forested mountains, its stone battlements stark against the green canopy. Further west, it descends into rolling grasslands, where sheep and goats graze peacefully near its foundations. And further west still, it marches into the vast, silent expanse of the Gobi Desert. Here it is not a wall of stone, but of earth, sand, and reeds, a low, weather-beaten rampart that seems to melt into the rocky, barren plains, a testament to endurance in one of the world's harshest environments. It is no longer a dead military structure. It has become a thriving ecosystem, a long, thin nature reserve. In the forests near the wall, the elusive red fox hunts at dusk, and the graceful Siberian roe deer steps delicately through the undergrowth. Wild boars root in the earth, and in the sky above, magpies, pheasants, and hawks circle on the thermal currents. You might hear the chirp of a cicada, or the call of a Chinese hill warbler, sounds of life that have replaced the sounds of war. The Great Wall, the Great Changcheng, is now more than anything a part of the geography of China and of the world. Its story is a long one, written in conquest and sorrow and ambition. But now the dragon sleeps, its great stone spine, rising and falling over mountains and deserts, has found peace. It has witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties, the march of armies, the tears of countless souls, and now it simply is, a monument to the past, a path for the present, and a silent, enduring witness to the endless turning of the world. Sleep now and dream of the endless wall and the peace it has finally found.